Welcome to Grameen Foundation's podcast series, Women in Agriculture. We discuss ways in which we can transform systems, mindsets, perspectives, behaviors, and actions so that rural-based women farmers and women entrepreneurs can show up with their full power. I'm your host, Lakshmi Iyer. Well, welcome everybody to the Women in Agriculture podcast, episode 3. On today's episode, we're going to be speaking with my India-based colleagues who conducted research on Mandi Phase 1. We'll broadly be discussing their findings around women's engagement with farmer-producer organizations, which, as we heard on podcast episode 2, is particularly important. It relates back to our new gender strategy for our Mandi project, Phase 2, focusing on increasing the active participation of women. And by women here, we're talking about women shareholders and women board of directors. This is a really stark shift away from what we did in Mandi Phase 1, actually, where we targeted increasing women shareholders and women board members, really increasing the numbers of these women within the FPOs, increasing their representation. It's a stepping stone, of course, but now what we're doing in Mandi Phase 2 is aiming to add value for women farmers and aiming to add value through FPOs and really centering in on determining how FPOs could engage women more substantially. As we know, farmer-producer organizations throughout India have a heavy male centricity. And so within Mandi 2, we're aiming to generate tangible benefits for women smallholder farmers as they become shareholders within these farmer-producer organizations. And really think through with FPOs and women what active participation actually entails. So with that context, I'd like to bring on my colleagues, Garima Joshi, Program Manager, and Dev Raj Vardhan, Associate Program Manager with the Client Insights for Impact team at Grameen Foundation India. Welcome both. Really excited to have you on this episode to share your insights.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
I'll actually start with you, Dave, because I believe you worked on the quantitative part of the studies, right? That were conducted under Mandi 1. What would be really great is if you could tell us a little bit about the women's active participation. What did we find as it relates back to the regression findings?
So thank you very much, Lakshmi, for highlighting this. And the research findings also entailed a lot of insights revolving around women active participation. But here I would limit myself and talk about findings that were really most significant and that is basically concerned with the participation of women around FPO activities.
Sure.
So before I just proceed with, discussing those findings with the larger team, I would like to mention this to our larger audience that I would like to say that the insights that I would be talking about were based on the data that we collected from the field and the results of the analysis that were subsequently performed. So as you mentioned, and from the regression analysis, it came out that women who were frequently engaged in strenuous and persistent work like agriculture, like working on farms, they often find it challenging to participate in FPO related activities. And the results were statistically significant. And this was due to the fact because due to this strenuous and persistent work that they did, they had very limited time available for them to participate in FPO related activities. Moreover, our on-field experiences also indicated that when women were involved in specialized activities that were only centered to female, like such as taking care of small children, infants, etc., it became equally difficult for them to attend FPO meetings. as they found it very difficult to share these responsibilities, making it least feasible for them to actively participate in the FPO activities. These were some of the major regression findings around, that limited women active participation at FPO level.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense when we think about it, right? As women labor on their farms or they're in their house rearing children, they find that their time is severely limited. And of course, they're unable to attend FPO meetings, and it's probably really difficult to engage with the FPO to even explain what their needs are. And so that it makes a lot of sense, and thanks for bringing that out. Something that I know the Monday 2 team has been considering is aiming to delve deeper to determine, how are we defining women's active participation with the FPO? And what we heard from our colleagues Purna and Neha during episode 2 from the gender strategy is that we need to look deeper, right? We need to look deeper as to what is going to generate value for women farmers. And quite frankly, it might not look like attending meetings. FPOs, perhaps they have to rethink how to add value for their shareholders. And it's not only because shareholders and specifically women have limited time, as you pointed out, Dave, but also what would generate specific value for women farmers. It might not be meetings, right, per se. And I wonder if I could turn to Garima and ask from the research, is there anything that we can point to that would help us understand or help us define active participation?
Sure, Lakshmi. First of all, thanks for having us. And I'm really glad that you brought the point of active participation. And I want to start with saying that one of the most significant learnings we had from this ANU study was actually that we were able to understand how FPO or a group membership is different from active group membership at an FPO. So from our quantitative and qualitative findings, we learned that when we talk about women membership in an FPO, it might refer to simple aspects such as inclusion of their name on the roster of the shareholdership. And women in this category might attend FPO meetings, but it would be irregularly. Then they might be gaining information and inputs, but maybe intermittently or from their spouses. And their contributions to the core activities and decisions of the FPO are also not very extensive. What this implies is that a group membership might reflect the level of affiliation with the FPO for these women, but may not necessarily signify deeper engagements. And this is valid for both women and FPO side. And on the other hand, as you said, that how we define active membership for a group or within an FPO, we learned that it is very complex and it goes beyond the nominal presence on the shareholders list. It actually involves a dynamic involvement in income generating activities, such as participating in selling the produce, contributing to the procurement processes of the FPO, exposing oneself to various facets of agricultural value chain activities that FPO engages with, or attending training sessions, and then actively participating in decision-making processes, or at least contributing to the major decision the FPO BODs are taking. So when we talk about this, then we understand that for active membership, there should not be a much difference between what a man or woman member can do within the FPO, or at least they have the choice to do within the FPO. So, but coming back to the definition, as I said, it is complex. And for us, this definition of active group membership is still evolving. And as Dave mentioned, it again depends on time availability at individual level, which is again dependent on factors such as women's ability to delegate or share responsibilities within households, their willingness to participate, and there are so many externalities as well that influence this.
There are so many externalities. I think you pointed them all out. It's so difficult to understand the type of profile of an active participant, and what that actually looks like. And this working definition that you've highlighted is very interesting in the sense that it's challenging for a woman to actively participate, in the sense that it's a male-dominated FPO to begin with, first of all. So even if she is actively attending meetings, for example, she may not necessarily be speaking out, increasing her agency, or raising her voice. Even if she is making decisions on the farm, perhaps the FPO is not able to provide tailored services that she really requires. It's good to know that your working definition of active participation doesn't only include actively attending meetings, because for us, on the Monday 2 team, it's important for us to also determine how the FPO can honor and help serve a shareholder who is actually within the active category, to encourage others to also be a part of that active category.
Agreed. Yeah.
So, yeah. Thanks for that, Garima. That's really great. Earlier, Dave, you provided some quantitative findings around women being and not being active. And I wonder, Garima, if there are other influences that you wanted to talk about qualitatively, that influence a woman's participation at the FPO.
Sure, Lakshmi. And I think I pointed out in the end of what I was saying was externalities. And in this context, I would like to talk about seasonality. And from this research, the ANU research, we learned that the timing misalignment between baseline and endline studies, when it get coupled with external factors like seasonality, it can pose a significant challenge as it influences active participation of women in income generating activities. I would explain how. So as just to start with, I would just want to give a brief about the agricultural seasons. So India experiences 3 agricultural seasons, as we know. The Kharif season, which lasts from June to November, featuring monsoon and crops like paddy. The Rabi season, December to June, which features crops like wheat, and the Zaid season, which lasts from March to May and highlights seasonal fruits and vegetables. So the baseline data collection was done during the Rabi season, that is winters. And as we all know, in winter days, when days are very short, there is very less time available to complete the chores for these women at the household and farm level. So this leaves these women with the very less time to participate actively within the FPO or in the activities that FPO is organizing. And then again, the timing of the study also modified the key crop in focus, with the wheat being the primary crop during the baseline. So this again influences the level of participation or the activities that are required both by men and women to contribute for the production of the crop. So what I mean to say here is the temporal shift and seasonality holds significance for our results and also influences the active participation. We found a decline in participation mainly because the key crops in focus was changed, and thereby it also affected the participation levels of both men and women across various income generating activities. And I think there was also influence of COVID, which I would like Dave to talk about more. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Garima. This is very interesting about what you mentioned about the seasonality. And just as a continuation to that, I would like to add another level of information to your finding. whereby I would highlight how COVID also affected the household agricultural participation. As you already mentioned, that during the baseline, when it coincided during the significant wave of COVID-19, and UP was one of the worst affected states in India, and lockdowns were imposed and outward migrations were restricted during that time, that significantly limited the availability of hired labor at the village level. So due to this a limitation in the availability of labor, consequently, the household became increasingly dependent on agriculture as the primary source of livelihood, whereby intensifying their reliance on manpower that was within the household. So during this challenging period, women's involvement in agriculture activities also reportedly surged, and whereby they started taking roles as laborers or helpers, which we saw in our baseline study findings. Moreover, during the endline assessment, the impact of COVID was almost negated, and the environment was almost unaffected by COVID-19. And the results represented an upswing in the supply of hired labor, leading to the subsequent reduction in the women's participation in household level agricultural activities, which we saw in our endline findings. So, so something that I would like to conclude here is something that we learned during this entire research activity of ANU, is that if we talk about the decline of participation in such cross-sectional surveys, and if the trends decline on every scale, this does not always represent a negative trend. This decline can also be attributed and can be influenced by various other externalities at the village level, at the community level, such as the respondents' own perception to participate less, the time available to them, as well as intra-household dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a super great sum up of it. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, high active women's participation at an FPO is not always the best case scenario. It's not always the worst case scenario. I mean, it seems to me, based on what you both are saying, which is incredibly interesting and so complex, it seems that active participation goes hand in hand with FPOs actually knowing and seeking out knowledge to understand the preferences of their shareholders, right? And this really goes back to perhaps the crop that women are working on or intensively involved in, and probably boils down to the agricultural practices that they want to handle on their own, what they want laborers to handle, laborers that they hire to handle, and that active participation is really something that's really hard to measure, is also what I'm beginning to understand and think through. I guess another complexity to throw in the mix is something that we talked about during episode 2, when, again, we delved into the gender strategy for Monday 2, and we discussed how so many of the women who participated in FPO activities as a shareholder during the first phase of the project, they were actually proxies for male members within the households. And I remember Neha and Purna talking about this in the sense that women were actually sitting in for their male counterparts, whether it's their spouse or their father-in-law from their household. And so it's probably worth just suggesting that in phase 2, we're really trying to shift FPOs away from being male-centric to being more inclusive, and aiming to strengthen the active participation of women shareholders, whether they're proxies or whether they are shareholders by choice. It's really important that FPOs, and that we support FPOs to think through this, tailor product services to women, and also as a project, really link back to these very interesting critical findings around how complex this entire scenario is, and that there's so many external there's so many external influences and internal influences that will determine whether a woman is an active participant at an FPO. With that, I will close this podcast and thank you both, Garima and Dave, for joining me on this very insightful journey into a subset of the findings that you were able to determine and glean from Monday 1. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Lakshmi.